Hello and welcome to the next section of our course. This part actually is about Document Object Model, or simply DOM. DOM is not a part of JavaScript language, but it uses JavaScript in order to manipulate and interact with your web page. So I believe you guessed that in this section more fun and interesting things are waiting for you. We're going to be covering the following things. You will learn about how to get and manipulate on individual and on multiple elements using DOM methods, how to change the styles of the elements using JavaScript. Also, you will meet DOM classes, events, which actually is really important to learn. You will be introduced to set and get attribute method, DOM navigation, creating elements, and much more. After going through all the main concepts and topics of DOM, we will put together all the stuff that we would have learned and build our next and little bit complicated application, which will be Node Manager app. During building the application, you will be able to do the next coding task, and also at the end of the section you can test your knowledge with another quiz which I have created for you. So it's time to go ahead and start another really interesting section. Let's move on. It's time to actually start learning how to manipulate on HTML page, or in other words, how to interact with HTML elements. This is the case when we need to start learning what is a document object model. In most cases, document object model is simply DOM. DOM specifies how JavaScript can access and update the contents of a web page. It is a cross-platform and language-independent model for manipulating and interacting with elements in HTML documents. The DOM is neither part of HTML nor part of JavaScript. It is a separate set of rules. It cannot work without a document. So when you create a web page and load it in a web browser, the DOM is enabled. The document is represented as a family tree. A family tree represents a real family, describes the relationships between family members, and uses terms like parent, child, and sibling. So one member of a family can be a parent to others, while also being the child of another family member and the sibling of another family member. This can be represented by the following model. Let's take a look on that diagram and go through the web page structure to see what I'm talking about exactly. The document begins by opening an HTML tag. All the other elements of the web page are contained within this element, meaning it is a parent. Because all the other elements are inside, the HTML tag has no parent itself. It also has no siblings. If we move one level deeper, we find two elements, head and body. They exist side by side, which makes them siblings. They have the same parent, HTML, but they also contain children, so they are parents themselves. The head element has two children, meta and title, siblings of one another. The children of the body element are h1, p, and ul, all siblings of one another. If we go down deeper still, we find that ul is also a parent. It has three children, all of them list elements. Instead of using the term family tree, it's more correct to call a document as a node tree. So what is a node? Document is a collection of nodes. Everything in HTML document is a node. So as we said, the two nodes representing the head and body elements are examples of child nodes, and the HTML elements node above them is a parent node. When we talk about nodes, we need to consider three main things: element nodes, text nodes, and attribute nodes. If you take a look on the screen, you will see here a simple paragraph with attribute and content. This is my first paragraph. P element itself is an element node. It contains text. This is my first paragraph, which we call a text node. Attributes are used to give more specific information about an element, so in the document object model, class attribute with all other attributes is called as an attribute node. Regarding DOM nodes, we will talk deeper a bit later. Alright. Throughout the course, we're going to build a simple but nice app using DOM. It is a node manager where you can add nodes, delete them. You can also edit each of the nodes. We have here the search filter. Using that filter, we are able to search through the nodes and get the needed one. And you can also hide the nodes and then unhide them. During the lectures, we will use this project in order to test and learn a lot of things regarding DOM. So throughout this section, you will learn how to change the content of HTML elements, how to change the style of them. DOM allows you to change the CSS styles for elements. Then you will learn how to react to HTML DOM events, and also how to add and delete HTML elements. Alright, it was a little introduction regarding what a document object model is. Let's move on. As we said in the previous lecture, throughout this section I'm going to use our application Node Manager in order to test things that I will demonstrate. The source files for our app are attached to this lecture. In source files I mean starting files which contain the ready index.html and style.css files. Also we have here script.js, which is empty for now. Then we have two folders, CSS and fonts, which we will use for inserting nice fonts and icons. You can download these files and use. Okay, let's open this folder in brackets and then run it in browser. So you see that here we have our application. At first I'm going to describe the HTML file, which consists of multiple elements and tags. I hope that you're familiar at least with ABC of HTML and CSS. In head elements we have the title, Node Manager. Then it is followed by three links. First one is for style.css file, where we have the main styling of our app. Next is a link for fontawesome.css. It contains some cool fonts that we use for editing and deleting the nodes. And the third link contains URL for Google Fonts website. Inside the body element, the whole content is wrapped in div element, which has the class name wrapper. It is followed by the header element, which contains h2 heading, Node Manager, and then we have form element with an input, which is needed for search filter. Header element is followed by another div that contains an ordered list. The list is for nodes, and each list item contains paragraphs for the nodes and for the icons. For now they are placed in static mode, but using JavaScript will make them dynamic later. Alright, next we have another div element which contains label and input, and we are going to use them for hiding and unhiding nodes. You can notice that for attribute inside label tag and ID inside input have the same values, hide, because this fact allows us to use checkbox to create click event. Let's see what I'm talking about exactly. Go to style.css file and find input. You see that checkbox for now is hidden because it has property display none. If we comment it out, the box will appear, and you can see that in order to check it, we don't need definitely to click on the box. Because of that, for attribute and ID have the same values, click on the label content is absolutely enough. Make sense? Okay. We will use this feature later in this section. Now let's get rid of the comment and go back to index.html file. The last part of the HTML content is div element, which contains form with two inputs, and they are used for adding the nodes to the list. Alright. Because of that, throughout this section we are going to use multiple DOM methods, properties, and also we are going to test many other things. That's why I wanted to show and describe the content of the HTML file. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is to open the developer tools. The majority of testing and demonstrating things during these lectures will be in console. In order to organize the browser and console better, let's place them side by side. For that, you need to click here and choose dock to left. And also, to distinguish better the app and console window, let's change the color of it and make it darker. Click again on menu bar, then settings, and change light into dark. Alright. On the left side of console we have element section, where you can find the content of current HTML file. Here we have all the elements and tags that we have described a few seconds ago. You can manipulate on HTML file from here. For that, you need to click on the right button and then click to edit as HTML and change the content temporary. That's right here, Node Manager app. And you see that the header is changed. But as I said, it's temporary because from here we cannot change the actual source file. I mean the actual HTML content. When you reload the page, you will get the initial heading. Okay, it's just a simple example how useful and powerful developer tools is, and you will see a lot of interesting things in it through this section. Alright, actually we are ready to move forward. As we already said, DOM stands for Document Object Model. It means that everything, all the nodes in document and the document itself is an object. At first, that's right in console, document. If you drop down it, you will see the whole HTML document, the exact same content as it was in brackets and also in element section. In order to prove that document is an object, I'm going to use type of operator, which returns the data type of an element. So let's write type of, then document. You see that we have here an object. Again, it means that document is an object. Okay. When the page is loaded in browser, you already know that the global window object is created, and simultaneously document becomes a property of global window object. We can prove that if we write here window.document. We will get again document. And if you drop down it, you will see again the content of HTML file with all its elements, tags, links, and so on. Alright. For now it's enough. See you in the next video. It's time to start learning about methods of the DOM which are used to get individual and multiple elements from the HTML document. In this video I'm going to show you what getElementById method is and how to use it. Actually, getElementById method is used to get individual elements from HTML. This method returns the element that has the ID attribute with the specified value. And in order to get the element, we need to indicate the relevant value of ID attribute. The ID is a string which can be used to uniquely identify the element found in the HTML ID attribute. Remember that you just need to write the value of ID attribute without the pound sign, which is actually used, for example, in CSS in order to select the element with ID. Alright. Let's go back to developer tools and use console to demonstrate some examples. In order to use getElementById method, at first we need to write document. You remember that document is an object and getElementById is its built-in method. As it was in usual object case, we need to use dot notation to invoke this method. So write dot get element by ID. Just for your information, remember that you must always protect the camel case method. You need to write each word with capital letters, except the first word get. Now let's go to element section, choose one of the elements, let's say unordered list, UL, which has the ID list. Then write it inside parentheses, within quotes, because it should be a string value. You see that it has returned the UL element with its whole content. I mean with its child list elements and paragraphs. Alright, let's move on. We can store this element in the variable as a value. For that, write var element equals document.getElementById, which is the list. You see that we have undefined. I hope that you guessed why. That's because we have stored this element in the variable on the fly, and therefore we got default temporary value for variables that is undefined. If we write element, then we'll get the same UL element. Okay. As you remember, we said in previous video that everything in document is an object. So if we check the data type of this variable using type of operator, so write type of L, then you will get an object. As usually in HTML document, the ID attributes are unique for HTML elements, but in case of that there is more than one same ID attributes, then getElementById method returns only the first found element. In order to prove that, let's assign the same ID attribute to another element, for example h2 heading element. So write here ID equals to list, then press Ctrl plus Enter, go back to console and store again the element in the variable. Then check the value and you see that we have h2 heading element. That's because getElementById at first found this element with ID list in HTML document and returned it. So again, if we have same ID attributes, this method returns only the first found element. Alright. Let's see what happens if the ID attribute that is indicated in parentheses doesn't exist in HTML document. Let's capitalize the ID list. Because of that ID attribute is case sensitive, list with capital letters doesn't exist in HTML document, and the value of the variable element is null. So remember, when you use getElementById method, but the ID doesn't exist, you always get the value null. Okay. As we said, we can manipulate and change the content of the HTML element. For that we use the properties of the DOM, and I'm going to describe and use in the future two main properties of DOM, and those are text content and inner HTML. At first, let's talk about text content property. It sets or returns the textual content of the specified node and all its descendants. In descendants, I mean the child of the element, the grandchild of the element, and so on. So when you have an element with children and grandchildren, using text content property, you will get the content of all those elements. And if you set text content property, any child and grandchild element will be removed and replaced by a single text node. Let's see what I'm talking about exactly. reload the page, then create again variable element and get UL element using get element by ID. Then using text content property, let's get the content of UL element. So write the name of the variable element.textContent property. You see that we have the whole text content which exists in UL element and what we see on the page. If you take a look on element section, you can see that in UL element we have inside the paragraphs the exact text nodes which we have just got in console. So as we said, text content property returns the textual content of all its descendants, and you see that in this case the paragraphs are the grandchildren for UL element. Alright. Text content allows us to set new content to elements using equals operator. Let's reload the page and write again variable element equals to document dot get element by ID and write the ID list. Then below write element dot text content equals to hello. So you see that here we have hello in console and also on the page instead of the nodes. If you take a look on HTML document, you will see that all the descendants of UL element with their text content are removed and they are replaced with just hello. Alright. Now I want to show you another way how to set and change the content of an element. For that I'm going to assign the ID attribute to heading element for a while. So let's write here heading. Now in console create variable heading and store in it text content of h2 heading element. So write variable heading equals document dot get element by ID and pass the ID heading, then dot text content. And now let's see what we have. Write heading and you see that we have Node Manager. Now get again the UL element, write variable UL element equals to document dot get element by ID and pass the ID list. And now set the text content in the following way. Write the name of the variable UL element, then dot text content equals to heading. So you see that we have Node Manager on the page, the text content of a heading element. Alright. Let's move on and talk about inner HTML property. Inner HTML sets or returns the HTML content of an element. In other words, it returns the whole HTML content, including tags, attributes, and text nodes as a string. Okay. Now let's get again the UL element. Write variable L equals to document dot get element by ID with ID list. Then use inner HTML property and write l.innerHTML. You see that we have the whole content of the UL element with its tags, attributes, and text as a string. Now let's set the HTML content using again inner HTML property. So write l.innerHTML and set it to hello. You see that we have hello on the page instead of the whole content that we had before. In this case, inner HTML and text content properties work in the same way, but if we write hello within h1 heading tags, then it will output on the page hello as a heading. And if we take a look on element section, then you will see that this heading element actually exists in HTML document. Now let's see what happens if we do the same using text content property. Write element dot text content and the same value hello within h1 tags. You see that we got h1 tags as a plain text on the page. If you check it in element section, you will see that the same we have inside the UL element. That is the main difference between text content and inner HTML properties. So again, text content property sets and returns text node of the element, and inner HTML sets and returns HTML content of the element. Alright. In this lecture we have learned how to get an individual element using getElementById method. We have seen how text content and inner HTML properties work and what is the difference between them. Let's go ahead. In previous lecture we have talked about how to get and manipulate on individual elements using getElementById method. In this video you will learn about another DOM method which selects an individual element from HTML document as well. This method is called querySelector method. The querySelector method returns the first element that matches a specified CSS selector in the document. Remember that it only returns the first element that matches the specified selectors. If querySelector cannot find the relevant element, then it returns null, as it was in case of getElementById. When we use querySelector method, inside the parentheses we need to write the argument, I mean selector, as a string. Passing the string argument always must follow CSS syntax. So if you are familiar with CSS, or at least know the ABC of it, then you won't have any trouble with that method. Okay, let's go to Developer Tools and see some examples. As it was in case of getElementById method, we need to attach querySelector in the same way to document object using dot notation. So let's create element and select UL element, write variable L equals document dot querySelector, and inside the parentheses let's write UL. You remember that in case of getElementById we needed to assign an ID to element and then indicate it inside parentheses, but when we use querySelector we don't need to do that. We just can select an element using its tag name or its attribute. So in this case we selected UL element, and querySelector method will return UL with its whole content. So you see that we have grabbed UL element from HTML document. In order to change and manipulate on its content, we can use the same properties we have already seen, I mean text content and inner HTML. They work in the exact same way. So let's change the content of UL and write l.textContent and set the content as hello world. So you see that we have hello world on the page. And in the same way you can use inner HTML property and change the HTML content of UL element. I'm not going to waste time on that. Let's move on. In order to select elements by attributes using query selector method, we need to indicate value of attributes with relevant signs, as it's in case of, for example, ID, which uses pound sign, and class attribute, which uses dot sign, because query selector does not select elements with any specified attributes, unlike the getElementById method. Let's take a look on our HTML document. In header element, we have form with ID search node. So let's get this element and write inside parentheses pound sign and the value of ID search node. And here we go. Alright. As we said in the beginning of this lecture, query selector method returns only the first element with specified selector. Let's prove it and select a list element. So write inside the parentheses ULLI. Here we have first list element. But what can we do if we want to select second or third list element? CSS3 gives us a solution about it. We can use a bit more complex selector, nth child, which matches every element that is the nth child, regardless of type of its parent. Let's select second list element and write inside the parentheses ULLI, then colon, nth child, then open again parenthesis and indicate the number 2 because we need to select second list element. So you see that we have second list. Let's drop down it and you can see that it includes two I elements, which are used for fun awesome icons. I mean edit and delete icons which you see on the page. Let's select and get second delete icon. In order to avoid a lot of typing, we can use L variable in which we have already stored grant parent of icons. So write L dot query selector, then inside the parentheses write P element, which is the parent of I elements, and then the class name of delete icon element dot fa times. So we have selected delete icon of second node, and you can see it on the page if you hover on that element. By the way, as you have just seen, we can use query selector method not only with document object but with other elements, in this case with variable L, in which was stored grandparent list element. Query selector method allows us to do that, but getElementById does not, because generally ID attribute is considered as a unique attribute for elements. Alright, so in this lecture we have learned about second DOM method, which is used to select any of the individual HTML elements and to manipulate on them. See you in the next video. You already know how to select and manipulate on individual elements using DOM methods, which are getElementById and query selector. Now it's time to move on and learn about how to deal with multiple elements at the same time. There are two methods in DOM, getElementsByClassName and getElementsByTagName, which allow us to select and manipulate on multiple elements using class names and tag names. Let's start from getElementsByClassName method, which returns a HTML collection of all elements in the document with specified class name. In other words, it returns an array-like object of all child elements which have all the given class names. Remember that this method returns an array-like collection, which is not actually an array. Alright, let's see practically what this method does. Choose from HTML document the elements that have the same class names. These kind of elements are placed inside list. I mean the I elements for icons. All these I elements have the same class name FA, so let's use this class name and select all those elements. Create variable icons because we are going to get multiple elements. Then write document dot get elements by class name and write the class name inside the parentheses FA. So here we have selected elements with class name FA, and you may notice that they are placed inside square brackets, similar as it's in case of array. But if you drop down, you will see that it's an HTML collection. This collection is very similar to an array. It has a length property, and also each of the items in collection has its proper index number, and they are zero based as well. Therefore, if we want to access on a particular item, we can use array syntax and put the relevant index number inside the square brackets. So write icons 0. You see that we have first item from HTML collection. In the same way, you can access on any of the items from it, let's say the second one. Because of that, the items in HTML collection are zero based, and also it has the length property. Then you're able to use for loops with this type of collections. Now I'm going to write some codes in text editor. So let's go back to brackets, then open script.js file, which is empty for now. At first, create again variable icons and select elements with class name FA. Write var icons equals document.getElements by class name, and then write the class FA. Then below create for loop, write for, then set the counter variable I equals to 0, then I is less than the length of the icons, so write icons.length, and then the increment I++. Inside the curly braces, let's log the variable in console, write console.log icons, and then in square brackets write I. Reload the page, and you see that we have here all I items from HTML collection. Okay, as you see, we have used for loop with HTML collection in the exact same way as it's in case of arrays. But as we said, collection is not an array, and therefore we cannot use array built-in methods with HTML collections. Let's prove it and use one of the array methods, push, which adds an item to array to the end. So write icons.push and then write hello. Reload, and we have an error which tells us that icons.push is not a function. Those words are not very helpful because they don't tell us exactly the problem, but we know what is the reason. The reason is that you cannot use array methods with HTML collections. And there is a nice way to fix that, and I'm going to show you it in a second. We need somehow to transform HTML collection into an array, and for that we have a great method in JavaScript which is called array.from. This method creates a new array instance from an array-like object, which in our case is HTML collection. Let's use this method and get rid of this line of code. Create variable var icons array equals to array.from, and inside the parentheses write icons. Let's log both variables in console. Write console.log icons array and then console.log icons. Reload, then drop down both of them, and you see that in the first case we have an array, and in the second case we still have HTML collection. So let me explain what happens here. When we assign array.fromIcons to variable icons array, then JavaScript engine creates memory space for icons array. This variable gets a value of icons variable, but because of using array.from method, icons array variable becomes an array in the execution stage. But variable icons itself maintains its value as HTML collection, and the result, what we have in console, proves that. Make sense? I know that it's a bit confusing, but if you look carefully on the results, everything will be obvious. Okay. After that, you are able to use array push method, but with icons array variable. So write icons array.push, then hello, and log it in console. Write console.log icons array. Reload, and you can see that we have here new item hello inside an array. Alright, I'm going to stop here for a while, and I would like to recommend you to think about what I've shown in this video. Would be great if you try to test these codes and practice on your own. Think of new examples and test them, for example using DOM properties that you are already familiar with. I mean text content and inner HTML. See you in the next video, where we will continue talking about how to access on multiple elements using other DOM methods. Let's continue talking about how to access and manipulate on multiple HTML elements. But before we consider another DOM method, I would like to show you another array method, which is very popular and useful when we deal with arrays. So I want to introduce you array forEach method. The forEach method executes a provided function once for each array element. In order to better understand what I'm talking about, let's go back to brackets and at first get rid of these lines of codes and leave only variable icons with getElementsByClassName method. Let's use forEach method with variable icons, which in this case is HTML collection, so write icons.forEach. forEach method uses anonymous function as a parameter, and this function itself uses its parameters. Generally, you can pass here 3 parameters. First one is for array item, which is the value of the current element. In this case, write icon. Generally, it's a standard way to use array name in plural form and the item of array in singular form. So that's why I'm using icon here. Second parameter of function is index, which returns index number of item, and the third parameter is array itself, which returns an array. This is the general structure of forEach method, but commonly it's used with only first parameter, which refers to item of array. But anyway, let's log it in console. Write console.log. In order to avoid typing console.logs for every parameter, we can just separate them by commas and use only one console.log. So write here inside the parentheses icon, then index and array. Reload the page and you see that we have an error, which we have already seen previously, and it's definitely clear why we have just got it. For each is an array method. It works with arrays, and in this case icons is just HTML collection. So in order to use for each for icons, we need to transform it into array. And for that we can use array.from method, which we have already seen previously. So write array.from and inside parentheses pass icons, then reload, and here we have results where you can find three parameters which we have passed inside a function. First one, we have an item or current element, then the index number and array itself. So it proves that function was executed according to the number of items. We had 6 items, and therefore function was executed 6 times. In order to see it better, let's leave just one parameter, icon, then reload, and we have 6 items of an array. Okay, let's move on and talk about another DOM method, which, like getElementsByClassName method, is used to get and manipulate on multiple HTML elements. I'm talking about getElementsByTagName method. This method returns a collection of all elements in the document with the specified tag name as an HTML collection. Alright, let's go back to brackets and get rid of these codes because I don't need them anymore. Let's get access on list elements, so create variable lis and use getElementsByTagName method. Write document.getElementsByTagName, and inside the parentheses indicate the tag name of list elements, so write li. Then log it in console, write console.log lis. Reload, and here we have all list elements. If we drop down it, you will see that it's again an HTML collection. The result is an exact similar as it was in case of getElementsByClassName method. So I'm not going to waste time on that because I think it will be boring for you. I just want to say that these two methods, getElementsByClassName and getElementsByTagName, work in the exact same way. The main difference is that getElementsByClassName selects elements with specified class name, and getElementsByTagName select elements using specified tag names. Alright, that's it. See you in the next video. We have already learned some of the DOM methods, and in this video I'm going to show you one of the most popular and frequently used method, which is querySelectorAll. You remember that we have used in previous videos querySelector method, which returns the first element that matches a specified CSS selector in the document, and the querySelectorAll method acts almost in the same way, but it returns all elements in the document that matches a specified CSS selector. Alright, let's go back to our text editor, create variable var lis equals, and use here the querySelectorAll method, write document.querySelectorAll, and inside the parentheses let's select a list element. Then log it in console, write console.log lis. Reload, and you see that we have the same result as it was in case of getElementsByTagName method. But if we drop down it, then you will see that instead of HTML collection we have something different, and it is a node list. Node list is an object, and it's almost the same as an HTML collection. Both of them have a length property, and the index numbers of items is 0 based. but none of them is an array. One of the main differences between NodeList and HTML collection is that NodeList allows us to use array for each method without transforming it into array. So let's write lis.forEach, then the function, and inside the parentheses write the parameter li, then log it in console, write console.log li. Reload, and you see that it works. But it doesn't mean that you can use other array methods with NodeList. We can prove that, and let's use push method and write lis.push, and inside the parentheses write hello, then refresh, and we have again an error saying that lis.push is not a function. The reason again is the same. NodeList, like HTML collection, is not an array. In order to use array methods except forEach with NodeList, you need to transform it into an array. Regardless of that you can use forEach with NodeList, I recommend you to always at first transform it into array and use forEach and any other methods. Alright. One of the advantages that Query Selector all has is that you can select multiple elements with multiple CSS selectors. For example, we can write here h2 heading element. Then we need to separate the selectors by comma. Now let's choose one more element from HTML document. Let's say div element with ID hide list. So write this value of ID attribute with £. Also, let's comment this code out for a while and see what we have. Refresh, and you see that all the elements what we have chosen are put inside our node list. You may notice that inside parentheses we have written at first list and then h2 selectors. But if you look at the results, h2 is placed first in node list. The reason is simple. The query selector all method puts the element in node list according to where these elements are placed in HTML document. It selects elements line by line from top to bottom. So at first it has found h2 heading, then lists, and then div element with ID hide list. Alright. The last thing that I'm going to show you is that we can change and manipulate on text or HTML contents of these elements using text content and inner HTML properties. Let's remove this comment from here, then transform the node list into array because, as we said, it's a better practice. So write array.from lis, and now use one of the DOM properties, let's say text content, and change the content of the items inside node list. So write here li.textContent equals hello world. Reload, and you see that we have changed the text content of the items into hello world. Okay. This was all about query selector all method, which is one of the frequently used and popular method of DOM. Let's move on. It's time to talk about another feature of DOM. If you're familiar with CSS, then you know that CSS is used for styling and designing the HTML page. But in most cases, it happens in a static mode. DOM allows us to use JavaScript in order to change the styles of HTML elements dynamically. Alright, let's go back to our developer tools and write some codes in order to change the style of one of the HTML elements, At first we need to use any of the DOM methods to select this element. You already know how to do that. Let's go to Elements section. In this case, I'm going to select H2 heading element, which is Node Manager, and I'm going to use query selector method. So write variable H2 equals document.querySelector, and inside the parentheses, that's write header and then H2 element. So here we have HTML element, Node Manager, and in order to change the style of this element, we need to use style object with its properties. So we need to write H2, then use dot notation, write style object, and then one of the properties, let's say color, equals, and write the value as a string red. So here we have selected H2 heading element, then using dot notation we have attached it to DOM style object, and then we have the property of this object, in this case color. Let's run it, and you see that the color of the heading is changed into red. If we check the heading element in the HTML file, you will notice that it contains style attribute with color property. So when we use style object, then we create inline styling for HTML elements. Instead of color, you can use any of the CSS properties, but there is a slight difference. For example, let's use background color property, write h2.style.background. You know that in CSS we write this property using dash. So write dash color equals to, let's say, green. If we run it, you will see that we have an error, because in JavaScript using dash sign means that it's the minus sign. Therefore, JavaScript developers decided that if property contains 2 or more words, then to use camel case method. So we need to write the following: background color, and the color with capital letter. So the background color of heading element is changed into green. If we check H2 element in HTML document, you will see that inside the H2 tag we have again style attribute with the background color property that we have just set. With background color property we still have the color property, so it means that using style object we add other CSS properties each time without removing the recent inline styles. If we use another DOM methods which returns multiple elements as HTML collections or node lists, then in order to change the style of one of these elements we need to indicate the proper index number of HTML element. And if you want to change style for all those elements, then you need to use loop. Alright, let's use query selector all method and choose list elements. So write variable lis equals document.querySelector all. Then inside the parentheses, let's indicate ulli. So you see that we have list elements as a node list. Now I'm going to select second element and change the style of it. So we need to write lis. Then inside the square brackets we need to indicate the index number of second element. Therefore we need to write here 1, then dot style dot background color equals to red. So second list element has changed its background color into red. Alright. As we said, in order to change the style of all list elements, we need to use loops. Let's select again list elements, write variable li's equals document.querySelector all, and then ulli. Now let's use for loop, write for, and then create the variable I as a counter, right, var I equals to 0. Then we need to write the condition I is less than li's.length, and then the increment I++. When you need to use multiple lines in console, you can just simply press Shift Enter and use multiple lines. So write here li's, then in square brackets write the variable I, then dot style dot background color, and change the background color into blue. So here we have all list items with blue backgrounds. And again, if you check the HTML document, you will see that all the list items have background color blue as an inline style. Alright. There is another way to change the style of HTML elements using CSS text property, which allows us to change multiple styles of elements. But when we use CSS text property, there is one thing to remember and note. It removes all the default inline styles. Let's see how it works. Write li's and select the first list element. So write the index number 0, then dot style, and use CSS text property. Write dot CSS text equals, and let's change the background color. So write background. In this case, we don't need to use camel case anymore because we need to assign the value to CSS text property as a string. So write background dash color and indicate the color as yellow. As we said, we can change multiple styles simultaneously, but they should be separated by semicolons. So write here semicolon and then font size 25 pixels. So you can see that first list item has changed its styles, and if you check it in HTML document, you will notice that recent inline style is removed, I mean the background color blue, and it's replaced with new styles. That's the way how CSS text property works. Okay. So in this lecture you have learned how to change style dynamically using DOM style object. There is another way to change the style using classes, which you will see in the next video. Let's go ahead. As I said in previous lecture, it's time to talk about another way which allows us to change the styles of elements using DOM classes properties. Nowadays this method is very popular. It allows you to avoid much typing and it's more flexible. When we want to change style of elements using class attributes, we need to work with two properties, which are class name and class list. Let's talk about class name property. It sets or returns the class name of an element. In other words, it sets or returns the value of an element's class attribute. Class name property always returns a string value. Alright, let's open brackets and write some examples. First of all, I'm going to open style.css file, and just for demonstrating some examples, I'm going to create multiple CSS styles for class attributes, which we will assign to the elements using JavaScript soon. So write dot change background, and inside the curly braces write background color and set it to yellow. Then write below dot change font, another class name, and write font style italic, and then the font size, set it to 40 pixels. Okay, let's go back to our script.js file. I'm going to select h2 heading element using query selector method. So write variable h2 equals to document.query selector. Then inside the parentheses, write header and then h2. And then using class name property, let's set class attribute for h2 heading element. Write h2. And again we need to use dot notation because, as you already know, h2 element is an object and class name is a property of that object. So write dot class name and set the value of the class as change background. Reload, and you can see that heading element's background became yellow. And if you check h2 element in HTML document, then you will find that it has new class attribute which we have just assigned. Background color became yellow because, as you remember, we have created in style.css file new CSS style for class attribute change background. Okay, now let's set the second class attribute for heading element, which is change font. Let's go back to script.js file and write h2.className equals change font. Reloads, and you notice that font of heading element became larger and italic, but background color of this element is no longer yellow. It means that when we assigned the second class attribute change font, then it has removed the previous one, which was change background. In order to maintain both class attributes at the same time, we can use a little trick. For that I'm going to use addition assignment operator, which is plus equal sign. But before I use it, I want to briefly demonstrate how this operator works. So let's create variable var a and set it to 10. Then use this operator and write a plus equals 20. Then log it in console, write console.log a. Reload, and we have 30. It's the same as the following. Let's comment it out and write a equals a plus 20. So you see that we have the same result. Let's get rid of these codes and use this operator with class name attribute. Just write here plus sign before equal sign, and in order to add this class name as a different one, we need to separate those class names with space. Refresh, and we have larger italic font with background color yellow. That's because we have assigned to h2 element both class names change background and change font. Okay, as we said, class name property returns string values, and in order to prove it, let's write console.log, then h2.className, reload, and you see that we have the class names here. Then check the type of these values using type of operator. So write type of inside the parentheses. And we have string. Okay. This was class name property. Now let's talk about another one, which, as I said in the beginning of the lecture, is class list property. It returns the class name or class names of an element as a DOM token list object. And because of that, it's a read-only property. You can use multiple methods in order to add, remove, and toggle class attributes. Alright, let's see how this property works. At first, get rid of these codes and write console.log h2 dot class list, reload, and you see that we have our class name inside square brackets. If we drop down it, we will see that it's called DOM token list. DOM token list looks like HTML collection or node list. It's an array-like object as well, which has length property, and the items have 0 base index numbers. This kind of object allows us to use methods that we have mentioned a few seconds ago. Now let's see how they work with class list property. In order to add second class name which will change font, we need to write h2.classList, and then we need to use add method, and inside the parentheses we need to pass name of the class as a string. Write .add, and inside the parentheses write change font. Reload, and you see that font is changed. And also in console we can see that new class name was added to DOM token list. Using class list property and add method, we add new class name and simultaneously maintain the previous ones. Working in this way allows us to avoid using plus equals operator that was in case of class name property. Besides the add method, we can use remove, which actually removes class name from the list. So let's write h2.classList.remove, and inside the parentheses write class name change background. Refresh, and the yellow background is removed, and also the class name is deleted from the list. Okay. The next method, and a bit interesting, is toggle. This method removes the class name if it does exist and adds it if it doesn't exist. So write another line of code and use toggle method. Write h2.classList.toggle, and inside the parentheses write again the class name change background. Before I reload, let's explain once again. So here we do not have change background class name, and in this case toggle method will add it to the list. So refresh, and you see that we have changed background. But if we comment this line of code out, then toggle method will remove change background class name from the list. Alright, that's the way how class list property with its methods works. There are also other methods, but the methods that we have discussed are the most commonly used and popular. Okay, so in this lecture we have learned how to change style of elements using class name and class list properties. See you in the next video. It's time to talk about one of the most important aspects in DOM and general in JavaScript as well. I'm going to show you how the web pages can be interactive and dynamic using JavaScript events. So what is an event? Events are actions that happen on a web page you are programming. As you remember, when we have been talking about functions, we said that in order to execute function, we need to call them. In this case, the same happens, but invoking function is managed by user's behavior. I mean, if the user clicks on button or presses the keys on keyboard or moves the mouse and many others. So you can imagine how the powerful and interesting things I'm going to show you. Alright, let's go back to brackets. At first I want to say that there are different ways to set up JavaScript events, and we will cover all of them. Now let's open index.html file and select one of the elements which will be used in order to attach the event. Let's choose heading h2 element, then go back to script.js file, which is empty for now, and get access on that element using query selector method. So create variable h2 equals document.query selector, and inside the parentheses write header h2. Then in order to attach click event to that element, we need to write following: h2.onClick. Each time when we use events, we need to always write on before the actual name of the event. In this case, I use click event, which is one of the most frequently used. But besides the click event, there are lots of other events like on mouse over, on mouse out, on key press, on load, and many others. Okay, now we need to assign to that event the function, but in this case the function should be anonymous, so we don't need to assign the name to that function. Write function, and inside the curly braces write console.log, and then the text clicked. Reload the page. So if we click on heading element, you'll see that we have clicked in console. It means that when I clicked on heading, event was fired and the function was executed. Okay, we can use another event on heading element, let's say mouse over, and I'm going to copy it and then change onClick into on mouse over, and also change the text in console, write mouse over. Reload. If we mouse over the heading element, then the second function will be executed. So you see in console mouse over, and if we click on heading, then click event will be fired. Therefore we have clicked in console. Alright. Besides this kind of way, we can attach events to elements in a different way. I mean that we need to add events as the HTML attributes to elements, but in this case we don't need anonymous functions anymore. We need to assign names to these functions, so let's get rid of these codes and write function A and function B. Then go to index.html file, find heading element, and inside h2 tag add events as attributes. Write onClick, and as the value of that attribute we need to write function name A with parentheses. Then add second event attribute on mouse over and the value as function B. Reload, and you see that the same happens as in previous example when we click or mouse over the heading element. Alright, I have demonstrated this approach just for your information. This way of adding events is a little bit older and sometimes not flexible, so I do not recommend to use it. But anyway, you should know this approach because in practice in the future you may sometimes come across this type of coding. Alright, one of the disadvantages of that approach is that when we assign the exact same event attributes with different functions, then only the first one is executed. So let's prove it. If we change on mouse over into onClick, and also the text inside console.log, right here clicked A and then clicked B, then reload. If you click on heading, then you will see that only the function A is executed and function B is ignored. In order to fix that, I mean to attach to the element similar events and also execute all of them, we need to use modern and frequently used approach, which is to add event listener. So let's stop here and discuss how to use add event listener in the next video. Alright, we are back and let's continue talking about events in JavaScript. As I said in previous video, I'm going to consider JavaScript event listeners in this lecture. So what is an add event listener? It is a method that attaches an event handler to the specified element, and it does this without overwriting the existing event handlers. You are able to attach as many event handlers to one element as you want. Alright, let's go back to our text editor, get rid of these codes, except the first line, because I'm going to use again the heading h2 element, then go to index.html file and remove the event attributes as well from h2 heading tag, because we don't need them anymore. Okay. So now I'm going to attach an event listener to h2 element in order to fire the click event. For that we need to write h2.add event listener. Remember that add event listener is a case sensitive, so you need always to write the words with capital letters except the word add. Then open parentheses and pass the first parameter, the event name, as a string. Right here, click. Again, remember that when you use add event listener, you always need to pass the event name without on, as it was in previous approach. So you need to write just click and not on click. The second parameter in add event listener method is a function, which should be again an anonymous function. And third parameter is a boolean value, true or false, which is optional and we will discuss it a bit later. So write here function, then inside the parentheses write console.log, clicked. Okay, reload the page, then click, and you see it works. When I click on heading, clicked appears in console. You can create the function outside the add event listener, but in this case you need to use a regular function. As a parameter in add event listener you need to pass the function name, but without the parentheses. So let's create the same function outside and call it a. Then inside the curly braces write again console.log clicked. And then instead of anonymous function, let's put the function name as the second parameter. Reload, then click, and we have the exact same result. Alright. As you remember from previous lecture, we were talking about the disadvantage of an approach where we were using event attributes in HTML element tag. We could not use the similar events, but with different functions at the same time. In case of add event listener method, it's possible. So let's copy the function and change it slightly. Right here the function name b, then clicked b in console. Also for the function a, let's write clicked a. Then add another event listener to h2 element and just change the function name, write b. Reload, then click, and you see that both add event listeners work. When I click on heading, both click events fire, and in console we see clicked A and clicked B. That is one of the differences between add event listeners and event attributes. Alright, now I'm going to talk about an event object. So what is an event object? When an event occurs, the event object is created. It tells us the information about the event, the information about which element the event happened on, which key was pressed for a key press event, or exactly at what part of the page the user clicked for a click event, and so on. When the event object is passed into a function, it is often given a parameter called e, or sometimes event. Alright, let's remove these codes and just leave one function with the proper addEventListener. Then pass e as a parameter and write it inside console.log as well. Reload, then click, and you see that in console we've got the type of event, which is mouse event. If you drop down it, you will see the list of different properties and their proper values. Let's consider some of them. For example, the first property is alt key, which has a value false. It means that when I clicked on heading, I haven't been pressing on alt key. If I reload the page again, then click the heading, and at the same time I keep pressing on alt key, then it will get the value as a true. So you see that we have true. Okay, if you go down, you will notice client X and client Y properties. Those properties indicate the exact coordinates of the clicked spot on the page, I mean the whole browser window. Client X shows us the number of pixels from the left, and client Y shows the number of pixels from the top. The next and useful properties which you may use in the future are offset X and offset Y. They are similar as client X and client Y, but the difference is that it measures pixels of the element itself. Okay, if you go deeper, you will see the path property, which consists of items from the current element to the global window object. If you drop down it, you will notice that it's actually an array. You can use those items with their proper index numbers and manipulate on them. Below you can find the type of event, which tells us that it's a click event. And also we have here a target property, which I think is the most important property in that list, because we will frequently use it, and also you will meet it in the future many times. You see that it has a value h2. This is the element on which we have bound the click event. Let's use this property and see exactly what it returns. Write inside console e.target, reload, click, and we have h2 element with its content node manager. Okay, now I'm going to show you kind of an interesting thing. Let's get rid of e parameter and inside console write special keyword this. So what to expect to get? Let's reload, then click, and you see that we have the same h2 element. I hope that this result is not surprising, because you know that this keyword refers to object, and in this case h2 is an object on which click event is attached. Therefore this keyword refers to h2 element. Alright, as we said, there are lots of JavaScript events, but we are not going to discuss each of them because I think that it will be a little bit boring. There is a great source regarding events. You can visit developer.mozilla.org website, and you can find here a list of the most commonly and frequently used events. I recommend to overview this list. It would be great if you introduce the majority of these events, because in the future you may need to use some of them. You'll be able to find this link in the text document, which will be attached to that lecture. Alright. We are not done with events yet. In the next video I'm going to discuss more advanced things regarding events, so let's move on. We already know what an addEventListener is and how it works, and now I'm going to consider a bit advanced stuff regarding event listeners. Let's go back to brackets. When we talked about functions inside addEventListener, you remember that there were two ways. The first was to pass anonymous function as a parameter, and the second way was to create function outside add-event-listener and then pass the function name inside it as a parameter. But you might notice that in both ways, we could not pass the arguments for those functions. In order to do that, we can use a little trick, which is very simple. Let's use this code from previous lecture. And at first I want to pass parameters inside the function a. So write here x and y. After that, inside console.log, write, for example, x multiplied to y. Then, in order to pass the arguments, we need to use anonymous function, and in that anonymous function we need to call function a with arguments. So write here, instead of a, function, and then invoke function a, write a, and pass the arguments, for example, 5 and 10. Reload, then click on heading, and you see that we have 50 in console. Okay, so generally add-event-listener doesn't allow us to pass arguments inside functions, but if you need it, you can use this simple trick. Okay, now I'm going to talk about another important thing regarding events, which is called event flow. At first, let's take a look on index.html file. You see here that we have div element, which is a wrapper. It contains all the elements, and if we attach add-event-listener to that element, then click on any element inside this div, the event will be fired. Suppose that another event listener is attached to header element, which is inside div element, and also another one is attached to h2 heading element. Then what will be the sequence of events when we click on h2 element? It's interesting because when we click on h2 element, it automatically means that we click on header and div as well. Let's see what happens. Go back to script.js file and remove these codes. At first, select the mentioned elements. So create variable var div equals document dot query selector. Then write div dot wrapper because it has the class name wrapper. Then we need to select header element, so create the variable var header equals document dot query selector, and write here header. And the third one, which we want to select, is h2 heading element, so write var h2 equals document dot query selector header h2. Okay, after that, attach to each of these elements add-event listeners. So let's start from div, write div dot add-event listener, then pass the click event, write click, then the second parameter, function, and inside the curly braces, write console.log from div. Now I'm going to copy it and paste twice. Then change div into header, write header. And also inside the console, write from header. And then below, write instead of div h2 element. And again inside console.log, write from h2. Reload, then click on h2 element, and you see that the sequence is following. Event firing started from inner elements. At first, event was fired for h2 element, then for header, and then for div. In order to make our example clearer, let's add some features for each function. delay each function execution for a second. For that, create variable delay, and then use one of the methods of date object, which is getTime. This method returns total amount of milliseconds from 1970. So write new date and then use getTime method, write .getTime. And now we need to add to that 1000 milliseconds. After it, I'm going to use a while loop, which will have the following condition. Write while, and inside the parentheses, write new date is less than delay. Okay, so what does these two lines mean? When the function is executed, then while loop gives us 1 second, because the condition inside it will become false in 1 second. The reason of this fact is that current time is less than delay with 1 second. Let's copy those lines and paste for the rest of the functions. Then reload, click on heading, and you see clearly what is the sequence of event firing in this case. So sequence of event firing from inner element to outer is called event bubbling, and it is the default behavior. As you remember from previous videos, I was talking about the third parameter of addEventListener method, which is a Boolean value and is optional. You see that here we don't have this third parameter, but if we write false for each addEventListeners, then reload and click, you see that nothing is changed. We have the exact same result. That's because addEventListener has false for the third parameter as a default. But if we change false into true, then again reload, click, and you see that we have an opposite result. The sequence of event firing is from outer elements to inner. This is called event capturing. So remember that when the sequence of event firing is from inner to outer, it's called event bubbling, and in case of from outer to inner, it's called event capturing. And you can manage it using a third parameter, which is a Boolean value. Alright. Before we finish talking about events, I want to show you how they actually work behind the scenes. So let's comment this code out and then grab H2 element and also addEventListener. Then change the text in console, write from click event. Then create function A, and inside the curly braces write console.log from function A. Then cut these lines of code in order to delay execution of codes for 3 seconds and paste them inside function A. Then change 1000 into 3000. Then call this function. And after that, below write console.log. Global code is executed. So when I reload the page, the execution of function A will be delayed for 3 seconds. And during these 3 seconds, I will click on H2 element. And let's see what happens. So reload and click a couple of times. And you see that we have from function A, then global code is executed, and from click event. So what happened? When we reload the page, global execution context is created. Then function A creates its local execution context. And actually during execution of function A, we have clicked on heading element, but the function inside add-event-listener did not start execution. It is waiting until function A finishes execution and then global code. After that runs the function inside event listener. So it means that at first JavaScript engine executes all the codes, and after that it waits for events. Alright. That was all about events. See you in the next video. In order to manipulate on HTML element attributes, DOM allows us to use several methods. The first method which I would like to introduce you is getAttribute. It returns the value of the attribute with the specified name of the element. The value that is returned using this method is a string. Okay, let's go to Developer Tools and use getAttribute method. At first, select one of the elements from the HTML file. Let's say div element, which has a class name wrapper. So let's write a variable div equals document.querySelector, and then write div.wrapper. Then use getAttribute method. So write div.getAttribute, and inside the parentheses, let's indicate the attribute class. So we have a wrapper, which is a class name of that div element. If we specify the attribute inside parentheses, which actually doesn't exist, for example ID, then getAttribute method will return null. So again, getAttribute method is used to get a value of HTML element attribute. Alright. The second method which is used in order to manipulate on elements attributes is setAttribute method, which sets the value of an attribute on the specified element. If the attribute already exists, the value is updated. Otherwise, a new attribute is added with the specified name and value. SetAttribute method uses two parameters. First one is an attribute name, and the second one is attribute value. You need to pass both of them as string values. Alright, let's go back to Developer Tools and use setAttribute method. So write div.setAttribute and write as the first parameter the style attribute, and then change the background color of div element. Write background, let's say coral. So you see that div element has changed its background color. If we check this element in HTML file, we'll find that it has a new attribute style with its value background coral. Using setAttribute method, you can assign to HTML elements any attribute you want, like ID, title, href, name, and so on. Besides the get and set attributes, we have other methods like removeAttribute and hasAttribute. The first one removes the attribute from the element. So if we write here div.removeAttribute and then indicate the attribute as a style, then the style attribute will be removed and div element will get back its recent background. Using second method, which is hasAttribute, we can check if the element has attribute or not. This method returns boolean value true and false. So write div.hasAttribute and then check if the div element has the attribute style. So write style here. You see that we have false because the style attribute is already removed and doesn't exist. Alright. Now I'm going to write a little example using setAttribute method and also the click event on button add. I want to change type of that input, make it as a submit button, and also as a value I want to use the text that I will enter here. So let's do it. In order to select those two elements, at first look at the HTML file. So we have here form element, which includes both input elements. They have the ID attributes add input and add button. So let's use these attributes and select elements, go back to script.js file and write variable button equals document.getElementById and insert here the ID of button, add button. Then write variable input equals document.getElementById and pass the ID add input. As I said, I'm going to use click event, therefore we need to attach to the button element add event listener. So write btn.addEventListener. Then write here click event and also the function. Here we will face to one unexpected thing, and in order to show that, I'm going to write here console.log hello world. Then reload, click on button, and you notice that the text hello world is blinking when I press on the button. The reason is that the type of that button is submit, and on click event it actually refreshes the page. So we need to somehow avoid this fact. We can use event object and the method of it, which is called preventDefault. This method prevents submitting a form when we click on submit button. So let's pass e as a parameter, and then inside the curly braces write e.preventDefault. Then reload, click on this submit button, and you see that page is not refreshed anymore, and we have hello world in console. Alright, let's go ahead and delete this line of code. Now I'm going to change the type value of input element as submit using setAttribute method. So write input.setAttribute. Then we need to indicate type attribute and then its value submit. Also, I'm going to change the value of value attribute and grab the text that I will enter in the form. For that we need to write input.setAttribute. Then write here the attribute value. And then we need to grab the text which I will enter. So for that we need to write input.value. Okay, everything is ready. Let's reload. Type here, for example, click me. After that, click on add button, and here we go. We have transformed the input element into submit button. Alright. It was a little example and I showed it to you in order to demonstrate how we can manipulate on elements using DOM attribute methods. Let's move on. In this lecture I'm going to talk about what is a DOM navigation. From the previous videos you remember that HTML document represents a structure like a family tree. So if we go back to brackets and take a look on our index.html file, you will find that some of the elements are inside other elements. which also include other elements, and some of them are placed side by side. This fact defines the relationship among the elements like parent, child, sibling, and so on. For example, if you look at the least element, you will see that it is a parent for the paragraphs and input element. But on the other hand, it is a child for UL element. Therefore, UL is its parent. The rest of the least elements, which are placed side by side, are siblings to each other. In this video, I'm going to introduce you some DOM properties which allow us to navigate between the elements. I think that for giving better explanations regarding DOM navigation would be perfect to select second least element. Therefore, I'm going to assign to it ID attribute. So write here ID least item. Then go to script.js file. I want to note that if you have an access on any HTML element, then using some of the properties you are able to reach to its parent element, grandparent, child elements, and siblings. Okay, let's select second least element. Write variable least item equals document.getElementById and pass the ID least item. In order to access on its parent element, we can use a property parent node, and I'm going to work in console. So write here least item dot parent node, and you see that we've got UL element. Using this property, we can access from least element to its grandparent. For that, we can add to least item dot parent node another parent node property. So we have here div elements, and if you take a look on HTML file, you will find that our least element is surrounded by UL element, which is its parent, and UL itself is surrounded by div element with class name nodeList. Okay, instead of parent node, we can use the exact similar property, which is called parent element. They work in the exact same way. So if we change parent node into parent element, then we will get again a UL element. So you can use any of those properties. Alright, they also allow us to manipulate on elements. For example, we can change the background color for UL element. For that, write here least item dot parent element dot style dot background equals to, let's say, orange. And here we go. The background of UL is orange. Okay. The next, I'm going to use the property which is called child nodes. So let's write here least item dot child nodes. And you see that it gives us a node list. And inside it we have all the items which are included in list element. And also we have here text items, which are called text nodes. They are actually the white spaces which are between the elements. So when you use child nodes property, they are recognized as text nodes. If we go back to index.html file and then remove these white spaces, so we need to place all those elements on one line. There were 4 text nodes, therefore we need to get rid of 4 white spaces. Then reload the page and use again child nodes property. You see that we have again node list but without text nodes. Alright, there is a better solution which allows us to avoid this kind of messy work. I mean, if we use the property called children, it will ignore all these white spaces and return the actual elements. So write list item dot children. So we have the exact same results, but there is only one difference. In case of children property, it returns HTML collection. And of course, you are able to use index numbers for accessing on any element inside them. Alright. Let's get back those white spaces and move on to another property which is called firstChild. Reload the page and use again list item. So write list item dot firstChild. And you see that again here we have a text node. This property, like child nodes, recognizes the white spaces as text nodes. So in order to reach directly to the child element, which is a paragraph in this case, and also avoid removing white space manually, we can use another property which is first element child. It works in the same way but ignores white spaces. So write list item dot first element child. And you see that we've got directly paragraph, which is a first child element for list element. Alright. I believe that you already guessed if we have first child and first element child properties, then DOM allows us to use last child and last element child properties. The difference is that they grab last text node and last element from the list in this case. Okay, so we have referred how to access on parent and on child elements. The only thing that I want to demonstrate in this lecture is how to get access on siblings. For that we need to use properties like previous sibling, previous element sibling, next sibling, and next element sibling. So write list item dot previous sibling, and we have text node. So again, like child nodes and first child properties, previous sibling and also next sibling properties count white space as a text node. And again, the solution is that we have to use previous element sibling and next element sibling instead of them. So if you write here list item dot previous element sibling, then you will get first list element. And in the same way, if you use next element sibling, then you will get third list element. Okay, so I want to recommend to practice on your own using those properties, because I know that everything seems very simple, but actually without practice you may forget afterwards how those properties work. See you in the next video. Using DOM manipulation, you are able to create new elements and then add those new elements to HTML document. For doing that, we need to use some DOM methods. Alright, let's go to brackets. At first I'm going to create a new element, and for that we need to use a method called createElement. So write variable new element. The mentioned method is a method of document object, and therefore we need to attach it to document. So write document.createElement. And inside the parentheses we need to indicate name of HTML element. In this case I'm going to create button element, therefore we need to write it as a string. So write button. Okay, let's see what we actually have done. Write here console.log, new element, then reload, and you see that we have button element. It's actually created, but it doesn't have a content yet. So in order to create content, we need to use another method which is called create text node. So create another variable var text equals document dot create text node, and inside the parentheses I'm going to write click. Now let's see in console what it looks like. Write console.log text, reload, and we have text here. It looks like as a string value, but it's not actually a string, it's an object, and button element is an object as well. So we have created button element and also text for the button, but they exist separately, and we need to add this text to button. For that, we need to use another DOM method called appendChild. So we need to write new element dot appendChild, and as a parameter we need to insert the text node that we have just created. So write here text. Okay, let's see the result in console. At first get rid of this line and then place this console.log below, reload, and we have results that we actually wanted. Okay, the element already exists but only in JavaScript and not in HTML file. Let's go to index.html file and choose the place where we want to add this button. Below we have a form element and I'm going to add button inside it. At first we need to select form element, and you see that it has an ID attribute add, so let's use it. Go back to script.js file and create variable form equals to document.getElementById and indicate the ID of the form element, write add. And now we need to use again appendChild method, which adds the element as a last child, in this case in the form element. So write form.appendChild and inside the parentheses write new element. Then reload, and here we go. Our click button is added on the page, and also if we check the HTML file, you will find that it's added to form element as a last child. Alright. You agree that it doesn't look good, and let's use one of the DOM methods. In order to change the style, I'm going to use setAttribute method. So let's write new element dot setAttribute, and I'm going to set the style attribute. Write inside the parentheses style, and then write here some CSS styles. Write display block, then write margin on top and bottom 10 pixels and auto on right and left. Then use padding 5 pixels on top and bottom and then 10 pixels. Also I'm going to change the background color, write background property and change the background color, right here coral, and also the last one right here color, change the text color into white. Reload and you see that it looks better. Okay, as we said, appendChild method adds the element as a last child, and there is another method which is called insertBefore, and using this method we are able to add the element at any specified place. In this case I'm going to add new element as a first child for form element, so write form.insertBefore. This method uses two parameters. First one is a new element, so write new element, and as a second parameter I want to indicate here form.children, and then inside the square brackets indicate the index number 0. It means that new element will be placed before the first child element. So reload, and you see that a button has changed its place and we have it above other input elements. Again, you can go to HTML file and you will see that button is placed as a first child for the form element. Alright. The last thing that I'm going to show you is how to remove the element from HTML file using JavaScript. For that we need to use removeChild method, and in order to remove the element, first of all you need to access on its parent. I'm going to remove new element that we have created, so write new element dot parent element. So we have access on form element, which is the parent of new element, and now we can use removeChild method, write dot removeChild, and inside the parentheses write as a parameter new element. Reload the page and you see that click button is gone. Check again the HTML file and you will find that it's removed from the HTML file as well. It's kind of strange, but without using parent element we cannot remove HTML element. Alright. So in this lecture you have learned how to create, add and remove elements using DOM. Let's move on. Alright. So we can say that you already know every main concept of DOM. You know how to select elements, how to manipulate and change the content and style of them. You also know how to attach events to HTML elements and lots of other stuff. Now it's time to put all of these together and start to program a little application. During this process you have a chance to do some coding tasks, and this is the first one in this section. Alright. Let's take a look on the screen. Here we have our node manager. We already know that below we have a form which includes input and submit button. They are for adding the new nodes, and your current task is exactly to do that. So you need to write the code to get the following results. When I enter something here, for example, fourth node, and then click on add button, it automatically is added to the list. And also the input becomes empty. New node has the same style and also it has the same icons for edit and delete. So what do you need to do? Let's take a look on HTML file. Obviously you need to create new list element with all its including elements. I mean paragraphs, icons with their class attributes, and also the input with class and type attribute. This input from CSS is hidden because it has the property display none. So it won't appear, and don't be confused about it. This input element will be used for editing nodes later. There is one thing to note. As you have seen, when I have typed something in input, that text value was added as a node in the list. So you will need to access and grab the value that will be written in the form. For that you need to use .value property like we have used it previously. The next feature of this application is that when the input is empty and I click on add button, it doesn't do anything. So you need to take it into account as well. Alright. Is it difficult? I don't think so. You know everything, all the stuff for writing this program. I want you to try your best. You may find kind of different solution, and that will be very nice. But if you have any trouble, it's not a problem. You will see the solution of this task in the next video. Okay, let's go ahead. Good luck. Alright, I'm sure that you have tried your best and somehow did this task. As I promised, in this lecture I'm going to show you a solution of this task step by step. As we said in previous video, we need to create new list element with all its including elements. This list element eventually should become one of the members of UL element. And because UL is its parent, first of all I'm going to select this element. So write variable UL equals document dot query selector and write inside the parentheses UL. As you remember, adding items should happen when we click on Add button. Therefore, we need to attach Add Event Listener on that element. Let's go to index.html. This element is placed inside the form, as we mentioned. It has the ID attribute Add button, so I'm going to use it and select this element. Go back to script.js file and write the following. Document dot get element by ID. Then inside the parentheses indicate the ID attribute Add button, and then attach to it Add Event Listener right here. Add Event Listener. Inside the parentheses indicate the event as click. Then create function. And now I'm going to test it in console. So inside the curly braces write console.log hello. Reload. Click on Add button and you see that it works. But again, because of that it refreshes the page on each click, we need to prevent it. So use event object and pass it as a parameter in a function, and then use prevent default method. So write e.preventDefault, then reload, click, and it works. Okay, let's remove this console, we don't need it for now. The next element that I'm going to use is input element. So I'm going to select it. Let's have a look to index.html file. This input element is inside form as well. It has the ID add input, so let's grab this element using ID attribute, create variable and call it add input, which equals document dot get element by ID, and pass the ID add input. Alright, at this point we have access on every existing elements, and it's time to go ahead and create a list element with all its including elements, I mean paragraphs, icons and input. First of all, create variable li and use create element method, so write var li equals document dot create element, and inside the parentheses pass list element. Using this method we also need to create other elements which will be included inside the list element. In order to write the code nicely, let's use a shorthand method, which is also a better practice, and separate the variables by commas. In this case, as remember, we don't need to write each time keyword var. So place here comma and then take a look on list element. Here we have two paragraphs. First one is for text and second one is for icons. So let's go back to script.js file and create first paragraph, call it first par, which equals document dot create element, and inside the parentheses indicate paragraph element. In the same way, create second paragraph. Write here second par equals document dot create element p. Okay. As you notice, the second paragraph contains two icons, therefore we need to create them. So create another variable and name it as first icon. This icon is for editing the notes. Right here, document.createElement, and indicate the element as I. Then let's duplicate it and change first icon into second icon. And the last element we got to create is input. So write here input equals document.createElement, and pass here the element name as input. Alright, so all the elements that we needed are already created, and the next thing I'm going to do is to add the proper attributes for that element. Let's again take a look on HTML file. You can see here that both icons have two classes. We need to add those class names to newly created icon elements. So let's copy it and go back to JavaScript file and write following. First icon.className equals, and paste here the class name that we have copied. Then do the exact same thing for second icon. Let's copy class name from HTML file, then write second icon.className equals, and paste here class. Alright. Also, we need to do the same thing for input elements that we have created. We need to assign class name and also set the type attribute for it. Again, go to HTML file. Input element has class name as edit note and the type attribute text. So write input.className equals edit note, and then input.setAttribute. Write here type attribute, and then its value as text. Okay. As we know, first paragraphs contain the value that are entered in the form. So for the first paragraph, we need to set text content as a value that will be entered in the input. So write first par dot text content equals add input, and here I'm going to use dot value property, so write dot value. Okay, the next step is to add those elements to HTML file. So let's start from icon element. Both of them have the same parent, which is second paragraph, so we need to add those elements to it using appendChild method. Write here second par dot appendChild, and inside the parentheses as a parameter, let's insert first icon. Then duplicate and change first icon into second icon. Alright, let's go ahead, and now it's time to add paragraphs and input to the list element. Again, I'm going to use appendChild method. You know, I want to say one thing. I'm not trying to explain again and again what those methods and properties do, because in previous lectures we have described them in details. And besides, the name of most of these methods and properties tell us what they generally do. So let's move on and add paragraph and input to the list element. Write li.appendChild, and then pass the parameter first paragraph. Let's duplicate it twice, then change first paragraph into second paragraph, and then below change it into input. Okay, let's check in console what the newly created list element looks like. So write console.log li, then reload, type something in input and click. So we have list element which contains two paragraphs and input. In the first paragraph you see the text that we have just typed in input. Alright, so we are almost done, but there are still a couple of things to do. We need to add the list element to the HTML document using its parent element, which we have defined at the beginning of this lecture. So we need to write ul.appendChild and then pass the parameter as list. Let's reload the page, type something in input again, then click, and here we go. The item is added to the list. But still we have the text in input. You see that it's not empty. We have to fix that, and also there is another thing that needs to fix. If we clear the input and then click on add button, then the empty item is added to the list. So in order to fix the first problem, we just need to do a simple thing. We need to indicate add input value as empty, and we need to write it after all of this stuff. So write below add input dot value and make it equal to empty strings. Then reload, write here something and click. So you see that item is added and the input is empty at the same time. Okay, let's go back and fix the second problem. For that we just need to use one conditional statement, I mean if statement. So write after the variable add input if. Also I want all of these codes to work when the value of add input is not empty. Therefore we need to pass here a very simple condition. Add input dot value not equals to empty string. And also we need to surround all of these codes by the curly braces of if statement. Alright, let's reload and write something, then click. The item is added and input is empty. And if we click again on button, then nothing happens because of the if statement that we have added finally. Okay, congratulations, our task is done. I think that it was interesting for you and you have enjoyed it. See you in the next video. In this lecture we are going to continue programming our application. Here we have finished version of our project, and in this video I'm going to show you how to edit the nodes and also how to delete them by clicking on the proper icons. So for example, when we click on edit button, then the input appears and you are able to edit the node. If we add here some text and then press enter, the node will be updated. Also, if we clear the input and press enter, then the node will be deleted. If we click on delete icon, after that the node will be removed. How to get these results you will see step by step in this video. Okay, I'm going to demonstrate some unknown and new things in this lecture, and because of that I've decided not to give it as a task, but anyway, before I show you how to program it, you can pause the video and try it on your own. Alright, let's get started. Go back to brackets, Here we have the codes from previous video, and also we have here our working project. If we click on those icons, they obviously do not work yet. As you have seen, edit and delete happens on click events, and therefore you may think that we need to attach add event listeners for all of these icons. Of course, this is one of the ways, but there is much better and interesting solution. I'm going to use only one add event listener, which will be attached to UL element and will work for all of those icons. UL element is already defined on global level, so I'm going to use it. But before I actually start writing the codes, let's separate different parts of our project with comments. Let's write about add items, and below write edit and delete items. Okay, as we said, let's attach to UL element add event listener. So write UL dot add event listener, and inside the parentheses that indicate the click event, write click and then function. As usually, I'm going to test in console how it works. So write console.log hello, reload, and click on any part of UL element, it doesn't matter. You see that on each click the event is fired. Okay. Actually, we want to execute the code inside function when we click exactly on those icons. Let's at first start from edit feature, and for testing purposes I want to see hello in console only when I click on edit icon. For that, again, we need to use event object and the target property. So let's pass e as a parameter in function, and also in console.log instead of hello write e.target. Then reload and click a couple of times on different parts of UL element. You see in console that we're getting the exact elements where we click on, and all of these elements are contained in UL element. Okay. From the previous videos, you remember that e.target property and the special keyword this were acting in the same way. But in this case, if we change e.target into this, then reload, and again click several times anywhere on UL element, each time it will return only UL and not its children. Alright, it was just for your information. In order to become more powerful developer, you need to know such details. Okay. Let's go ahead and get back e.target inside console, reload, and then click on edit button. So you see I element in console with its proper class names. You see that it has two class names. First is common for all icons, but the second one is unique. Therefore, I'm going to use it. In order to access on second class name, we need to use class list property. So we write here dot class list and then indicate the proper index number. In this case, we need to select second class name. Therefore, we need to write 1. Reload. Then click again on edit buttons. And you see that we have second class name in console. Okay. So the code inside function should be executed in the case if I click on that icon. For that we need to use if conditional statement. So write if, then inside the parentheses write e.target dot class list, and again indicate the index number as 1, then triple equals, Let's go to index.html file and copy the class name and then paste it here. Then place console.log inside curly braces and write inside parentheses hello. Refresh, then click anywhere except edit button. You see that it doesn't work, but if we click on edit button, then we will have hello in console. Okay, great. I think that it makes sense. Let's move on to the next step and take a look again on finished project. So when we click on add button, you see that icons become hidden. So let's do it. At first we need to access on parent element of those icons, which is a second paragraph. At first let's remove this console.log, then create variable and call it parent paragraph. So write var parent par. Then we use again e.target. So write e.target. And let's reach the element using parent node property. So write here parent node. In order to hide it on click event, we need to use style property. So write below parent par dot style dot display equals none. Reload, click, and you see that icons are hidden. Okay, perfect. Let's move on to the next step. As we know, list element includes two paragraphs and input, which is hidden from CSS. The second paragraph is already defined, and now I'm going to define the rest of these elements. Create variable and call it note, because actually this paragraph contains the text of note. The first paragraph is previous sibling for second paragraph that we have just created. So in order to access on it, I'm going to use previous element sibling property. So write parent par dot previous element sibling. In the same way, input element is the next sibling for the second paragraph. Therefore, I'm going to use next element sibling property. So create variable input. Write var input equals parent par dot next element sibling. Let's again test in console and get these variables on click. So write console.log note and then input. Reload, click on edit button, and you see that we have first paragraph and input in console at the same time. Alright, the next step is that we need to appear input element on click. Again, I am going to use CSS style property. So write input.style.display. And in this case, we need to assign the value block. Reload, click, and you see that the input has appeared. Alright. The last thing that I'm going to show you in this video is to insert the text of the node as the value of input. So for that, I'm going to write input.value equals node dot, and use here the text content property, write text content. Refresh, click, and here we go. Alright, I'm going to stop here, but we haven't done editing and deleting part yet. We'll continue it in the next video. Okay, let's continue. In this lecture I will show you two main things. how to use keyPress event in order to edit note using enter key, and then how to delete notes clicking on delete buttons. Okay, we need to use another add event listener which will be attached to input element, and here I'm going to use keyPress event. Using keyPress event, events are fired when we press on any key on keyboard. So write input.addEventListener, then inside the parentheses indicate the event keyPress, and also write the function. Then test again in console how it works, so write inside the curly braces console.log hello. Reload the page, click, and when we write something, then on each key press the event is fired. Alright. So when I click on edit button, the input is appeared, but you notice that there is no any button in order to add updated content to the note, and I'm going to do it using enter key. So for that again we need to use event object and one of its property called keyCode. Let's pass e as a parameter and then write it in console as well. Reload, click on edit, then type one character, and you see that in console we have event object called keyboard object. If we drop down it, you will see that it has multiple properties which are a little bit different than it was in case of click event. From these properties we need to focus on keyCode property. In this case it has the value 101 which is relevant to key E. As we mentioned, we need the value of keyCode property when we press on enter key. So let's press on it, and you see that we have another event object, and instead of E we have key name as enter. Let's drop down it, and you see that the value of keyCode property for enter key is 13. Alright, this is what we needed. Now let's use if conditional statement and pass the following condition. As we said, we need to execute bunch of code when we press on enter key. Therefore in condition e.keyCode must be equal to 13. So write if, then e.keyCode triple equals to 13. Let's test again in console. Right here you pressed enter key, and then create else statement and write console.log you pressed other key. Then reload, click on edit button, and then press at first any of the keys on keyboard. You see that we have you pressed other key, and when we press on enter, then we have you pressed enter key. Alright, it works perfect. Let's remove else statement and the console as well. Now the next step is to grab the updated value from input and assign it to the note as a new content. So we need to write note.textContent equals input.value. Now we need to appear again icons for edit and delete, and at the same time we need to hide the input. For that I'm going to use again style properties. As you know, icons are contained in second paragraph, which is parent par, so we need to write parent par dot style dot display equals to block. And then for input element write input dot style dot display equals to none. then reload and test, click on edit, then type something, press the enter key, and here we go, it works. But if we clear input and then press enter, then the item will be updated as empty. We don't want it, we want the item to be deleted if it's empty. For that we need another if statement in which those codes should be included. So write here if and the condition as input.value which not equals to empty strings. Then pass these codes inside the curly braces. And then we need else statement where we will pass the codes in order to delete item if the updated value is empty. So write else. I'm going to use remove child method in order to delete item. In this case we need to delete a list element. Therefore, as you remember, we need to access on its parent, which is in this case UL. So at first let's access on a list element. Create variable var li equals input.parent node, and then delete the item. Write li.parent node. So now we have access on UL elements, and from here we are able to delete the item. Write dot remove child and pass the parameter as li. Let's reload, then click on edit and clear the input, then press the enter and you see that the whole item is gone. Okay, great. Regarding edit feature we are done, and now let's move on to the next step, which is to delete the item when we click on delete icon. I'm going to use the same approach as it was in case of editing the items. We need to use else if statement with the similar condition, but in this case we need to use class name of delete icons. So let's copy and paste here. Also we need to grab the class name of delete icon from the HTML file. Let's copy it and paste here. Alright, the condition is ready. Now let's test again in console. Write console.log. It works. Then reload, click on delete button and you see it works. Okay, let's get rid of console.log and then write the similar code as it was in previous else statement. Again we need to delete list item using its parent. So at first let's define list element, but in this case I'm going to access on it with kind of different way. So let's create variable list, write var list equals, and I'm going to use here target property, write e.target, and then use parent node and again parent node. After that, remove the element using remove child method. So write list dot parent node dot remove child and pass the parameter as list. Reload the page, then click on delete and you see that the items are deleted. Perfect. So the edit and delete part is done. Let's move on and program hiding elements in the next video. As I promised in previous video, I'm going to show you how to hide and unhide items from the node list. At first, let's see how it works. We have here the finished version of our project. So when we click on hide nodes, then the items are disappeared, and also the text hide is replaced into unhide. And when we click on unhide nodes, the items appear on the list again. Okay, Let's go back to brackets and take a look on HTML file. We have here div element with ID hide list, and it contains two elements, label and input. As you see, the input has the type checkbox and it's hidden by default from CSS file. This checkbox is used to manage different conditions for items. As you already know, when for attribute inside label tag and ID of input element have the same values, then clicking on label element is enough in order to check the box. For clearness and for better understanding, I'm going to disable display none property from CSS file. So let's go to style.css and comment display none property out. Then go back to script.js file. At first I'm going to write the comment. We are starting the next part, so write here hide items. In order to hide list items on click event, we need to attach add event listener to input element, but at first we have to select it. So write variable hide item equals document.get element by ID. You know that input element has ID hide, so let's pass it here, write hide. And then I'm going to attach add event listener to input element, so write hide item dot add event listener. Then indicate the click event and also create the function. As usually, let's test it in console, so write console.log checked. Reload, then click on hide nodes and you see that it works. Okay, let's move on and on click hide list items. For that I'm going to use if conditional statement. We need to hide list items when the checkbox will be checked. I'm going to use another DOM property called checked, which checks if the input is checked and returns the boolean value. So write if, and then as a condition write hide item dot checked. So when the checkbox is checked, then this condition becomes true and we need to indicate the proper state of the list items. In this case, we need to hide them. Therefore, I'm going to use style property and then display none for UL element, which was defined on global level at the beginning of this project. So write ul.style.display equals to none. Reload, click on hide. So checkbox is checked and you see that list items are hidden. But if we click back on hide nodes, then nothing will happen. In order to appear again list items, we have to write else statement. Write else, and in else statement we need to define display property as block. So write ul.style.display equals to block. Reload, then click. So the items are hidden and when we click back they appear again. Okay. The next thing we need to do is to change the text content of the label element. I mean to change hide into unhide when we click on label. Before that we need to select label element, but we need to write it above if statement. So create variable label equals document dot and use here query selector method, and inside the parentheses write label. Now inside the if statement we have to set text content of label as unhide nodes. So write label dot text content equals to unhide nodes. reload. From HTML file, the label element has content as hide nodes, so when we click on a label, text content will be changed into unhide nodes. And when we click back, the items will appear, but label will maintain its content as unhide nodes again. So in order to fix that, I'm sure that you already guessed what to do. We simply need to change text content again inside else statement. So write label.text content equals to hide nodes. Reload, then click, and you see that it works. Alright, so we are almost done, and the last thing that I'm going to do is to hide checkbox again from CSS. Let's go to style.css file and remove the comments from display property. Then reload again, and here we go. That's it. The only thing that we have to do is to program search filter. So see you in the next video. This is the last video in this section, and we are going to finalize our little application. The last part to program is a search filter. At first, let's take a look on our finished project and see how search filter works. When we write here something, then the filter searches if those characters exist through the list items. It doesn't matter if we write here characters in lowercase or in uppercase, the filter searches the proper items anyway, because it's programmed as case insensitive. Alright, let's go back to brackets and as usually, write here the comment search filter. First of all, before you actually start to program it, you need to select search input element. So let's go to index.html file. Here we have the form element with ID search node, and it includes the input that we want to select. Okay, let's go back to JavaScript file and write variable search input equals document.querySelector. Then pass the ID search node and then the input element. Okay, I'm going to attach add event listener to search input element, and also I'm going to use new event which is called key up. This event is fired when we release the pressed key on keyboard. So let's write search input dot add event listener, then indicate, as we said, key up, and also write the anonymous function. I'm going to test it again in console, so write here console.log. Key is released. Reload the page and then keep pressing the key for a while, and you see that when I release the key, event is fired. Alright, the next step is to grab the value which will be entered inside search input. So for that I'm going to create the variable search character. Let's remove console.log and write var search character. Again, you need to use event object and its property target. So at first pass e as a parameter inside function and then write e.target.value. As we have already mentioned, the value that will be entered inside search input should be case insensitive. In order to reach that, the value of search input and also the text contents of list items should be transformed either to uppercase or to lowercase. For that, in JavaScript we have string methods like toUppercase and toLowercase, and in this case I'm going to use toUppercase. So write dot toUppercase. Let's check in console how this method works and write here console.log search character. reload, and if we type something in lowercase, then this method will transform the values into uppercase. It doesn't matter if we type here in lowercase or in uppercase, it will always keep the values into uppercase. Alright. You know that we are going to compare the value of search input to list items. Therefore, we need to select them. So write var nodes equals ul dot get elements by tag name and pass here list item. In order to compare the value to each list item, you need to use loop through the items. I'm going to use for each method, but you can feel free and instead of for each use for loop. It's up to you. As you remember, get elements by tag name returns HTML collection. Therefore, we need to transform this collection into array. And for that, let's use a well-known method which you are already familiar with. So write array.from. Then pass here the variable nodes. Then use for each, write for each. Inside the parentheses, write anonymous function. And then pass as a parameter node, which should be the current item. As we said, we need to compare node text to value of search input, and for that we have to grab text content of the list items which belongs to first paragraphs in the list element. So let's create the variable var part text. As you see, inside for each method we have parameter node, which, as I said, represents current item, and we need to use it here. So write node dot first element child, which is the paragraph in the list item, and then text content. So we already have access on the first paragraph's text, and now we need to use if statement and the following condition. So as you know, we have transformed search input value into uppercase, and therefore we have to transform paragraph text into uppercase as well. So write if, then part text dot to uppercase. Now I want to introduce you a new string method which will actually help us to search the proper characters. This method is called indexOf. For demonstration purposes, let's write some examples in order to see how it works. I'm going to use console. So let's test it. Write hello as a string. Then dot indexOf. And inside the parentheses, pass as an argument one of the characters, let's say h. And you see that we have 0, because indexOf method gives us 0 base index numbers. So it has searched inside the string the character h, which is the first character in string hello, and therefore it returned its position as a 0. So if we change h into l, it will return 2. In hello we have 2 l's, but indexOf method, after finding the first l, terminates searching and returns the position of the first found character. Besides, if we pass as an argument several characters at the same time, it will return the position of only the first found character. Okay. If the character doesn't exist in string, then indexOf always returns -1. For example, use character, let's say k, and you see that we got -1. Okay. IndexOf method also takes into account the sequence of characters. So if we write here HO, you see that both characters are included in hello, but the sequence is incorrect. Therefore, index of returns -1 as well. Alright. The next thing about index of is that it's case sensitive. If we write here H in uppercase, still we will get -1. And that's the reason why we had transformed values and text into uppercase. Okay. I think that it makes sense. For programming the search filter, the index of method is a great tool. Let's go back to brackets and use this method. Write .indexOf. And as a parameter, let's insert search character in which we have stored the value of search input. Now write not strict equals to -1. So if this condition is true, it means that we have found the proper list item. Therefore, we need to maintain this item on the page. So write inside the curly braces note.style.display equals to block. If the condition is false, it means that current item is not matched to search character value. Therefore, we need to hide it using else statement. So write else and then note.style.display equals to none. Okay, reload the page, then type, for example, the character F, and you see that we have only first note because only this item contains character F. Now write D, and we have second note and third note because both of them contain the character D. Okay, let's recap how the filter actually works. So when I type a single character, for example I, and release the key, then the event is fired and function is invoked. JavaScript engine executes the codes line by line, and when it reaches to for each loop, then for the first iteration it will check first list item, and because of that it contains character I, condition inside if statement becomes true, and the first node will be maintained on the page. Then for second iteration, the value of node is second list item. Again, engine checks by the condition of if statement if it contains character I. We know that it does not, therefore the condition is false, and because of the else statement it becomes hidden. Then in the same way, the third list item will be checked. It contains I, therefore it's maintained on the page as well. For now we don't have more items, and therefore loop is finished. Alright. Congratulations, we have just finished our project and also this section regarding DOM. I'm sure you've got a solid knowledge and learned lots of things about DOM, but in order to test your knowledge, a little quiz is waiting for you. So let's go ahead. Good luck.